Hey guys, my name is Dan Berglund, and I wish I could join y'all and be in New York with you, but Vicky asked me to share just a little bit about my story and my background and my passion for workplace ministry and seeing um, myself and hopefully you guys too as you enter the workplace as ambassadors for Christ in the workplace as your mission field. So, to give you a little background, I went to Boston College. Grew up in Minnesota, came to BC, and graduated in 2006. And I've been working ever since. I work in an investment bank. I work at Goldman Sachs here in Boston on our equity derivatives um, trading strategy group. And a little background on my decision to get there. When I was in your stage, or really junior senior year, I started to have a kind of a pulling of interests, if you will. On the one hand, I really wanted to um, go into full time ministry. I thought that and God had really done a lot in my heart and really changed a lot of my thinking. And I had a tug to go to seminary and or to maybe even join staff with Cru or at least intern for a year and check it out. The other side was finance, what I'm doing now. I had a really strong desire and interest to go into um, finance and specifically on the investing side. And so I had these two competing uh, pulls, right? And I thought, all right, Lord, am I just crazy? Do I, on one sense, have this desire to go into ministry, and then on the other hand, I have this desire to go into what seems like a very, very secular and dark world of Wall Street. Um, and so I thought about it, prayed about it a lot, and the more I discussed it, read, talked with wise people, and prayed about it, I started to realize that the two aren't all that different after all. Because at the end of the day, if my heart is focused on serving Christ in whatever area of um, vocation I go into after college, um, I'm called to be a full time uh, minister, a full time missionary uh, for Christ. It just depends on where I'm going to be living that out. So as I began to develop that aspect of my thinking, I started to realize that they're really not all that different. Whether I go and become a pastor or work in full time ministry, or if I go work on Wall Street, uh, my end goal and end game is to glorify Christ and make Him known, um, and be an ambassador for Christ, whether it's in a formal ministry setting or if it's in a secular setting. And so, as my mindset started to change, I started to have a healthier perspective on what it was going to look like for me to make that transition from college into the real world, and it challenged me to reorient my thinking in order to get there. And that's where I really challenge you guys first and foremost with is begin to see your life in this next season of life as venturing into full time ministry. It just the only details are to be figured out is where you're going to do that. Um, Whether you're going to be a doctor, a teacher, working at Starbucks, grad school, or maybe you are going into full time ministry. Maybe you're going to take a year and intern with Cru, which I highly recommend. It's something I never did, but it's something a bunch of my friends did, and actually looking back, I wish I would have done it. So that's a little plug. But whatever you're going to do, you are called to be a full time missionary for the rest of your life. And so once I started to go through that change, obviously I ended up at Goldman. I had to start thinking about what does it look like to live that out in a professional setting. Very different than a college setting, very different than a dorm setting. I was used to sharing. I played football at school. I was used to trying to share my life and what Christ had done in my life with my teammates. I understood the athlete ministry and what that was looking like. Led Bible studies and prayer groups, and I, I knew what it was like amongst peers. And all of a sudden, I was stepping into this new world where I didn't really uh, understand the dynamics. I didn't understand the culture. I was all of a sudden the young guy, and not just by 4 years, right? I was the young guy by 40 years in some cases. And so that was a little intimidating. But I would say that wherever God calls you, the first thing you are to do is to assess the culture. Start to figure out the environment that God has placed you in and what that looks like and what that's going to look like as you begin to sort of assimilate. Um, it's interesting when you look at the Apostle Paul, his uh, preaching or his discussions with the Pharisees in the temple are very different than the Greeks on Mars Hill in Athens. He, though speaking the gospel, though sharing the truth of Christ, the words he uses, the tone he takes, and the tactics he used to address the cultural specific aspects of those two groups are very, very different. And I think it's very similar for us. If you're preaching in front of a congregation, or you're talking in the dorm room on campus, or you're um, speaking with your coworkers on a trading floor on Wall Street, uh, they're all going to be very different. And the key is to understand the culture. So I'd say that's the first order of business. Figure out the culture. Begin to know what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. We want to be both appropriate, but also bold in that, and not ashamed of the gospel. I think a lot of your conversations, and I'll say for me personally, a lot of my conversations and the times where I've been able to share my faith in the workplace has been very relational. It's been through relational evangelism that I've been able to actually share what Christ has done in my heart on a personal level, and really be able to share that with others in a way that um, gets them interested, and is um, nothing more than purely sharing my testimony, my story. Um, and I would encourage you that where you're probably going to find most of the opportunities through relational evangelism, through getting to know people, getting into their lives, understanding where they're coming from, and sharing yourself and sharing what Christ has done in your heart. I don't think there are often times where during the workday you're going to have opportunities to build into people's lives, but at least in my line of work, the workday is extremely busy, and there isn't actually a lot of time to really, apart from kind of quick conversations, uh, to really grow deep. And so I think it's a lot of times outside of work or those non-professional settings where you're able to really dig in. Um, but you have to figure out what are the cultural um, norms and different areas where you can begin to um, really work within that corporate culture um, to do that. And I would say that, you really need people alongside you to do that. I'm very fortunate to have come to find a lot of a group of other Christians at Goldman, and our Goldman Christian Fellowship I've been fortunate enough to be on the leadership team of, is has really been a huge support, and a number of the other folks that I've become friends with. A lot of them are down in New York, which I'm up in Boston, so I don't have the proximity. But even the other night, we had a call with three of us just spending time praying together, encouraging each other, talking through different instances we've had at work and opportunities we've had. But we have a desire together to bring the truth of the gospel relationally to the people of Goldman Sachs. We want to help encourage other believers in their faith. We want to be able to support and pray for our coworkers. I would say the first order of business is praying for your coworkers, praying for those people that, if you're in my case, you work with 12 hours a day, and they're people that you do a lot of life with. You spend more time with them than anyone else. For my buddies that I work with that are married, they unfortunately see me more than they do the rest of their family. Um, so I think really getting into people's lives and understanding, letting them know that you care, um, allows those barriers to start to come down. Um, there are barriers where you're not supposed to talk about religion and politics, right? And there's taboo subjects. Yet at the end of the day, people want to be known, and we as believers, and seeing what Christ has done in our lives, have the ability to really be known and be vulnerable to people, which in turn will allow them to be more vulnerable with us. Um, I wish I could share a number of different examples of conversations I've been able to have, but in the interest of time, I think the main one of my primary, I guess, words of advice would be to set your reputation early. I like to say this to